Picture a German soldier in the muddy trenches of the Western Front. Artillery has stopped. Smoke hangs low. There's an eerie silence, the kind that makes your chest tighten. Then, through the mist, he hears shouting in English and the sudden metallic scrape of steel. What charges toward him isn't a machine gun or a tank, but something that looks almost medieval, a long, sword-like blade fixed to the end of a rifle. This was the British bayonet, an ancient weapon by industrial war standards, yet one that genuinely terrified German soldiers during the First World War. To understand why this bayonet inspired fear, you have to forget modern ideas of clean, distant warfare. World War I combat was brutally personal. Trenches were cramped, visibility was poor, and battles often ended with men fighting face to face in the dark. In that environment, technology didn't always mean newer was better. Sometimes, the oldest tools were the most psychologically devastating. The British Army entered the war with a strong belief in cold steel. For decades, British military doctrine emphasized bayonet fighting as the ultimate test of infantry spirit. Recruits drilled endlessly, practicing lunges, parries, and charges until the movements became instinct. Officers believed that a determined bayonet charge could break enemy morale even before contact was made. And in many cases, they were right. At the heart of this fearsome reputation was the British pattern 1907 bayonet. By the standards of the early 20th century, it was enormous. With a blade over 17 inches long, it turned the already lengthy Lee Enfield rifle into something resembling a spear. Compared to shorter German bayonets, the British version gave soldiers a longer reach, and that mattered immensely in trench raids and close combat. But it wasn't just the size. The design was brutally simple and effective. A long, narrow blade optimized for thrusting rather than slashing, it could penetrate thick uniforms, webbing, and even light cover. In the tight confines of a trench, there was often no room to swing a rifle like a club. A straight, powerful thrust was faster, deadlier, and harder to stop. German soldiers quickly learned to fear British bayonet attacks, especially at night. Trench raids were often launched silently, with orders to avoid firing rifles. Gunfire gave away positions and invited artillery retaliation. Instead, British troops advanced with bayonets fixed, relying on surprise, aggression, and close combat. Accounts from German veterans describe the shock of suddenly facing shouting figures emerging from the darkness, steel glinting inches away. This fear wasn't imagined. German military reports and memoirs repeatedly mention the psychological impact of British bayonet charges. Even when machine guns and rifles dominated the battlefield, the mere threat of a bayonet assault could cause units to break or retreat. The bayonet represented something more than a weapon, it symbolized an enemy willing to close the distance and kill you with his own hands. Another reason the bayonet terrified opponents was the nature of the wounds it inflicted. Bayonet injuries were often horrific. A thrust to the abdomen or chest could be fatal even if it didn't immediately kill. Medical treatment in trench conditions was limited, and infection was common. German soldiers knew that being stabbed was not only painful but likely a death sentence. That knowledge added to the dread whenever British troops were known to be nearby. There was also a cultural element at play. British propaganda and training emphasized the bayonet as a symbol of courage and aggression. Songs, posters, and manuals glorified the charge, portraying it as the decisive moment of battle. German intelligence picked up on this mindset, and over time, British troops gained a reputation as relentless in close combat. Fear feeds on reputation, and reputation feeds on fear. Ironically, by the middle of the war, many military thinkers knew that bayonets accounted for only a small percentage of actual casualties. Artillery, machine guns, and rifles were far deadlier. But warfare is not only about statistics, it's about morale. A soldier who believes he will be overrun and stabbed is more likely to panic than one facing distant gunfire. The British bayonet excelled as a psychological weapon. The Germans adapted in various ways. They developed their own trench knives, sharpened entrenching tools, and shorter, handier bayonets for close fighting. Training began to emphasize countering bayonet attacks with grenades and rapid fire. Even so, the fear never fully disappeared. In the chaos of a night raid, there was little comfort in doctrine or equipment. The bayonet's ancient appearance added to its impact. In an age of industrial killing, being threatened with what looked like a spear felt primitive and brutal. It stripped away the illusion of modern, impersonal war and replaced it with something raw and terrifying. Many German soldiers later wrote that bayonet attacks felt less like battles and more like executions carried out in the mud. What's fascinating is how long this fear endured. Even in the Second World War, German troops remembered the British reputation for bayonet fighting from the previous conflict. British training manuals still stressed cold steel, and although firearms had advanced, the bayonet remained standard issue. Its practical use declined, but its symbolic power did not. Today, the idea of an ancient bayonet terrifying modern soldiers might seem strange. Drones, missiles, and precision weapons dominate our understanding of warfare. But the story of the British bayonet is a reminder that fear is often rooted in the human experience of combat. When soldiers are forced into close quarters, stripped of distance and technology, the simplest weapons can become the most frightening. The British bayonet terrified German soldiers not because it was technologically superior, but because it represented intent. It meant the enemy was coming for you personally. No machine could be blamed, no shell fired from miles away. It was a man, charging through smoke and mud, determined to end the fight at arm's length. And that is why, even in the most industrialized war the world had ever seen, an ancient piece of steel remained one of the most feared weapons on the battlefield.